Welcome back to the Republican Women Fighting to Take Back America podcast. I'm Martha Jenkins, president of the National Federation of Republican Women.
She's fighting to take back America. It's time to take a stand. She's fighting to take back America and let your voice be heard. She's fighting to take back America and make her proud again. Oh, the movement has already begun.
Today, we're talking about a major fraud scandal in Minnesota tied to taxpayer-funded programs. These cases raise a bigger question. How did the guardrails fail, and what reforms are needed so that public dollars serve families and communities, not fraudsters? Joining me is Minnesota State Representative Kristin Robbins, who's been closely involved in pushing for accountability and stronger oversight long before this was headline news. Representative Robbins, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get started. Tell us when and how you learned about the fraud in state government.
So I became chair of the fraud committee last January when the committee was newly created. And I had heard about the fraud in childcare early from like the 2015 to 2019 period, but I think most people thought it was fairly well in hand. And then we also had a big COVID-related child nutrition scandal called Feeding Our Future that was getting a lot of attention. So we thought those were probably the two main areas of fraud to dig into. But as we looked at it and did hearings over the last year, we've realized that there are multiple vectors of fraud. It's not only child care, child nutrition, but it's sober homes, autism centers, non-emergency medical transportation, housing stabilization, integrated community supports, any of these sort of waivered Medicaid services that are common in some states where Minnesota has more than most. And there are very few guardrails in these programs, and that's where we found multiple vectors of fraud.
Well, this is certainly extremely disturbing because some of this money was federal taxpayer dollars that were funneled into Minnesota, just as it is in all states, but it comes from federal money, a lot of it does. So I know you mentioned the committee where you learned a lot of this from investigating, but I've heard that there were also whistleblowers coming to you and that they were punished. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the original genesis of the fraud in Minnesota seems to be this child care fraud that stemmed, in the maybe 13 through 19 era. And there was a big Office of Legislative Auditor report that sort of brought this all to the surface in 2019. And there had been whistleblowers who were trying to sound the alarm on the child care fraud, who were fired or demoted or threatened. And so that really created a culture of fear and silence among the agency officials who knew what was going on. So last year, I carried a bill that expanded whistleblower protection. So not only could they be protected if they reported through their agency or to the attorney general, but also if they reported to legislators and law enforcement. And all of a sudden, we were hearing from whistleblowers in a lot of different areas of government who wanted to finally be able to safely come and tell their story.
So when some of this information was coming out, and I know that it came out in Minnesota before it, hit the national news, but did the people in authority do anything to stop it or investigate it themselves, or did they just shrug their shoulders and not do anything?
For the most part, and again, this is a lot from the whistleblowers, they'll say they tried to tell DHS, they tried to tell the Attorney General, and our committee was their third stop of trying to get someone to pay attention. And then we have been paying attention. We've had hearings monthly. When we're not in session, when we are in session, I have a hearing every Monday morning. So we've really been able to shine a light on this. So the viral video from Mr. Shirley, which was really helpful in getting a national spotlight on that, that was a child care fraud we had a hearing on last February where we outlined 72 problematic child cares we thought they should be investigating. But I don't know if the department did anything with the list we gave them. But once the Shirley video hit, national attention, then they started saying they were doing site visits and looking into it. Belatedly, the Walz administration also has paused payment in some programs and taken some other steps, but it's only because of the public pressure from our committee, from the U.S. Attorney's Office that's been prosecuting cases, and local journalists. That's really what has made them finally belatedly take action.
Okay, so they didn't do anything until it got too hot for them on a national level. Do you think that was for political reasons, or do you think that they just didn't care, or why do you think they just pushed it under the rug?
I mean, I would hate to speculate on their motivation, but it does seem to be very political. Most of the fraud, as I've said many times, is in the Somali community, and that's a very big donor and voting bloc for the Democrat Party, who's been in charge here in Minnesota for a long time. So I certainly think that played into it. And people who wanted to blow the whistle, they were told, well, if you say anything, you'll be called racist or Islamophobic. So that could ruin your career. So you shouldn't say anything. So I think it was kind of political and social pressure that kept a lid on it for so long.
Well, that's certainly disturbing. So you mentioned that there's been some prosecutions. How many people have been convicted, and how many trials are still going on, and what kind of sentences are they getting for those who've been convicted?
So it's going to be a multi-year process, but under the leadership of the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Minnesota, just in the child nutrition program, the Feeding Our Future scandal, there have been 78 indictments and 61 convictions so far. And they have more cases that we're expecting to go to trial in March and April. So that's an ongoing way they're prosecuting. They've also, I believe, charged 8 defendants for autism centers, 1 for integrated community supports, which is like supporting people with disabilities so they can stay independent. So we're starting to see charges and prosecutions in these other vectors of fraud, but those are just starting. So I think this will be a multi-year effort to prosecute the billions of dollars of fraud here. Well,
let's hope that time doesn't run out on the statute of limitations before every guilty party gets prosecuted and sentenced for their wrongdoing.
Yes, I have a bill I'm introducing this session to expand the statute of limitations or extend it so that we can make sure we're not letting that happen.
That's great news. That's great news. So one of the things that a lot of people started wondering when they first heard about this scandal was, well, gosh, how many other states is this going on in, and how big of a scope is there fraud in all of our federal programs? Because we always, as conservatives, as Republicans, we always think government is too big, and it's definitely too big if we're funding fraud. So do you have an opinion on that? What do you think?
Yes, it is absolutely too big. Government has grown to the point that we can no longer effectively manage it. And so that's harming taxpayers. It's harming our vulnerable citizens who aren't getting the services they need. We had a story, just a heartbreaking story here in Minnesota last night, where a woman who was supposedly getting help through one of these fraudulent providers, because they hadn't been paying her rent on her behalf as she expected, she's now homeless. So this is devastating to real people who need services, who are caught up in these fraud scandals. So we absolutely have to limit the size of government. And I would say across the country, this is a problem. So during the Biden years, they expanded a lot of the Medicaid programs where states could apply for waivers, and it was a way they could get more funding into social services without having to go through Congress. So these expanded waivered services are where most of the fraud is in almost every state, and it's because there are very few guardrails in these programs.
Well, that's certainly what I've been afraid of, and I certainly hope that Republicans and other interested parties in all these other states will work to root out the fraud in their states. And we obviously want to prosecute and get rid of it where possible, because, as you say, not only is it wasting taxpayer money, but it's actually defrauding people who deserve help from getting help. So I have one last question for you today. Obviously, Minneapolis has been in the news for other reasons as well as this fraud issue in your state, but do you think the anti-ICE protests are any way related to trying to cover and hide some of the news stories about the fraud? Do you think there's a relationship there, or is that just a conspiracy theory among conservatives?
You know, I just don't know. I think some of the timing was interesting. Like the night the second Nick Shirley video came out was the night that the governor decided to do a primetime address about ICE, and he'd never done that before. And so I don't know, but the fraud is a real issue and we have to deal with it. And the fraud, it's not going to go away in a couple of hearings. This is going to take a absolute house cleaning in the executive branch, getting rid of all the commissioners, deputy commissioners, and layers of bureaucracy, and then putting in a no fraud, no excuses culture. We've not had any accountability yet. Tim Walz hasn't fired anyone. So we need to introduce a culture of accountability that will make sure taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. So this is a project that is going to take many years to kind of clean everything up and get government back to really being serving the people.
Well, I certainly hope that will be the case. I know there was a promising statistic in yesterday's job numbers that showed the federal government shrank to the lowest number of employees since 1966. So it would certainly be great if the bloated bureaucracies in different states would follow that example and do the same thing. Well, Representative Robbins, it's been great having you today. You've really been a watchdog for this fraud. You've really been great in getting the information out to the general public all across the United States about it. We appreciate everything you're doing. And we just want to thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm a proud member of my Northwest Metro Republican Women. I have been for years. They're the backbone of so much of the grassroots work here in our state, and I'm grateful for all you do.
Well, thank you so much. And that leads me into just letting our audience know that if you're watching this podcast and you are not a member of NFRW or not a member of a state federation, please go to nfrw.org or email membership@nfrw.org to get involved. Please share, like, and subscribe to our podcast, Republican Women Fighting to Take Back America. We're on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, X, Truth Social, and TikTok. Thank you again, Representative Robbins.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.